Searching the Scriptures is a method for training pastors how to study the Scriptures and then turn their studies into effective sermons. And that's the goal, to teach pastors to preach well and to preach carefully and to preach accurately so that their churches might grow in strength and maturity. It's a curriculum that's been developed out of the work of Pastor Chuck Swindoll, and we are talking about it today to give you a brief overview of what the curriculum contains and how you might be able to use it. So the curriculum is divided into 6 sections or modules, and the first section is really an introduction. It establishes the foundation upon which we do the rest of the work. We stand our foundation on 3 principles. The first principle is that Christ is central to the Scriptures, and that the Old Testament anticipates His coming, and the New Testament looks back on His life on earth and explains the significance of His coming to earth and His death on the cross. So principle 1, the Bible is central in our studies because Christ is central in the Bible. Secondly, we know and we understand that the Scriptures are able to give us spiritual nutrition. We can feed our souls on the truths that the Bible contains. And so we pay attention to what the Bible has to say in terms of its significance to our lives. And the third principle is that if the Bible contains nutrition for our souls, then it's worthwhile to study it carefully, and it's worthwhile to be diligent as we do so. And that's what this curriculum is built to do, to help pastors become diligent and careful in their study of the Bible. So the first real step of the method is what we call observation. This is where we take a text or a passage in the Bible and we really look at it carefully. And as we look carefully and deeply into it, we're not trying to judge what it says just yet. We're only trying to judge what we see. There are patterns in the text and there are repeated words. There are emphases and there are structures in the text that we can identify, but we have to notice them first. Observation is the key step. Observation is always worthwhile, and it's always the most important step when we begin to evaluate a particular scripture. So we teach our pastors to look carefully at the words that are there. Are they repeated? Are they similar words? Are there themes being developed in the words? And then stringing words together is how we make sentences, and so we evaluate the sentences. What are we being told to do? What are we being shown? What is the logical sequence of events in the passage that we're looking at? All of these are indicated by the sentences that we can observe. Pastor Chuck has already said in his book that he does this every single time he comes to a passage in preparation to preach or to teach. We can think of ourselves during that moment as being a detective of some sort. I often refer to the great fictional detective Sherlock Holmes when I'm discussing this with the students. So picture yourself in a deerstalker cap with a big pipe in your mouth and observe the text just as well as you can, and then we're ready to move to the next section. And that is where we ask, what does it mean? We're about the business of interpretation, which is not the work of a detective. That's the work of an archaeologist. When an archaeologist finds something that's very old and been buried in the ground for a long time, he picks it up, and as well as just looking at it, as well as just doing his observation, he also asks the question, why is it here? And what does it mean that it's here? And so we do the same with the text of the Bible. When we read a particular passage, we ask, well, what does it mean? And we wrestle with issues of language. There might be particular words to wrestle with that we need to understand completely. We wrestle with the issues of genre. Genre is really just the kind of literature that we're reading. Is it a history that explains the pattern of details that happened in a sequence of events in a particular king's life? Or are we perhaps looking at poetry, where we really ask the Bible to speak to our emotions, our heart, because poetry does that. Poetry speaks at a very emotional level, not at a particularly technical level, the way a history might. After considering genre, we can also look at the culture in which this text was written. Are there cultural clues? Are there cultural understandings going on beneath the text that we need to take into account before we decide what something means? Our culture in the 21st century is not the same as the culture as it was in Jesus' time. But nevertheless, we can understand the cultures that prevailed during the times of the Bible. We just have to do a little digging, perhaps a little encyclopedia work, perhaps consult some dictionaries and maps, but we can come to terms with some of the cultural norms that were prevailing during the times of the Scriptures. And once we understand that, then we're a long way towards understanding what the text means for us today. We're digging for an always true truth in the passage that we've studied. And once we've determined that, then we're ready to move on to the next stage. The third step is called correlation. Have we found a truth? Have we established an always true principle that holds water? Can we validate it from the rest of the Bible? Because the Bible is a unified whole, and if something is true eternally in the Bible in one place, then that same truth should be found at play somewhere else in the Scriptures. God doesn't contradict himself when he writes the Bible to us. So first, we use the Bible itself to explain the Bible. Are there any correlating passages? Are there any passages in the Scriptures that actually resemble the passage we're trying to evaluate and trying to validate? Do they work along the same principles? Are they saying the same thing? It's always helpful when the Bible explains itself for us that way. Also, we can always use the easy passages to explain the difficult passages. Everybody who studies the Scriptures comes to the occasional passage where it's just a bit of a puzzle. And as we try to unravel the puzzle, as we try to make all the pieces fit, we need to be careful that if we have a difficult passage, that there may be passages in the Bible that we already understand, that are already very plain in their meaning, that we can bring to bear and help us to explain that one puzzling verse. That's always a useful exercise. Always use the easy to explain the difficult. Well, after we've validated our findings, after we've established that the always true truth that we have identified in our passage is indeed an always true truth, then it's time to start thinking about applying that truth in our lives in the 21st century. Developing applications that will preach. Developing applications that mean something sensible to our congregations, developing applications that are achievable and doable in the 21st century for the people who want to apply the Bible to their lives. Does it work at the bus stop on Monday morning? Does it work in the grocery store when you're checking out your food? What does the Bible tell us to do? That's what we're looking for when we enter the discipline of application. And we teach pastors to be very careful in how they choose an application. Application is really just obedience to the Scriptures put into action. So we teach application as the last step until we're ready to develop our message. The 6th module in our curriculum encourages pastors how to craft a sensible sermon that is developed from their observations, that incorporates their interpretations, that demonstrates that they've done the hard work of correlating their truths and shown an application that is applicable from that always true truth to the lives of their congregation in the 21st century. To communicate that and develop a message that develops that theme easily and readily and listenably, well, that's the skill of a good pastor. Preparing a message that will move his congregation along. Preparing a message that first perhaps speaks to his heart and encourages him to change some things about his life. But then, and only then, can he encourage his flock to make some changes in their lives too. So there are the 6 modules, the 6 sections of this curriculum. So we hope you join us sometime as we present these seminars and these conferences, and you can get more details here.